Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this session on the guidelines for sustainable open source communities in the public sector. My name is Vivian, and today I'll be joined by my colleague Barbara. We are both members of the European Commission's Open Source Observatory, also known as OSOR. The focus of today's presentation is on the sustainability of open source communities in the public sector. We believe that only by fostering sustainable open source communities can we build a European open source ecosystem. More specifically, we will talk about OSOR's guidelines for sustainable open source communities and deep dive into some examples of such communities that were either launched by or joined by the public sector and the factors behind their success. Before we start, allow us to tell you a little bit about OSOR. Since 2007, OSOR has brought public administrations and open source communities together by offering a single access point for information that aims to foster the use of open source within the public sector. OSOR is hosted on the JoinUp collaborative platform, and its code is open and accessible to everyone. We also share guidelines, best practices, and other useful resources that we will talk about shortly. Finally, OSOR nurtures an active community by bringing users together through regular webinars and workshops. Here is a screenshot of OSOR's homepage. As you can see, the content on OSOR is quite varied. It includes news on the latest developments in open source in the public sector. We have longer case studies with insights about good practices, interesting projects, and much more. You'll also find event listings for open source focused events in Europe, including the ones organized by us. All of this information is not just published by OSOR. Any community member can contribute, and all you have to do is create a JoinUp account. A key resource I haven't touched on yet is the Knowledge Center, which gives users access to a variety of resources in addition to these I mentioned. First, there is the country intelligence on open source policies in and beyond Europe. And so far, we have published reports outlining the status of open source policies in about 30 countries. There are also case studies on the use of OSS in public administrations. And one other unique resource is the list of open source associations, competence centers, and points of contact in each EU member state. If you're here for code, we also have a list of OSS repositories that are relevant for or created by the public sector. Finally, there are our guidelines for creating sustainable open source communities in the public sector, which are the topic for today's presentation. I will now hand you over to Barbara, who will tell you more about them.
Thank you, Vivian. It is well known that public administrations stand to gain from the use of open source software. However, despite the benefits of using open source software, we observe a somewhat scattered landscape of its adoption across public administrations in Europe. Additionally, our team firmly believes that the adoption of open source can only be sustainable if there are communities around it. In other words, public administrations should not be mere consumers of the software, but rather active contributors to it. Motivated by these observations, we decided to investigate what makes open source communities in the public sector sustainable, and then created practical guidelines with these findings for OSOR users. In the guidelines, you will find recommendations, best practices, and resources for anyone looking to adopt and create open source software in the public sector. Thanks to the e-translation tool that was integrated into JoinUp, you can auto-translate the guidelines into more than 24 languages. We took a multi-step approach to produce the guidelines. The first step was to identify the key success factors that contribute to community sustainability. Then we identified sustainable communities in order to learn from them and their successful experiences. We also relied on collaboration with our OSOR community. We launched a survey to better understand the sustainability of public sector communities and developed 5 case studies looking at communities in Italy, Finland, the Netherlands, France, and Germany. We organized an in-person workshop in pre-pandemic times and held a webinar to gather user feedback. You can find more information on our approach and our literature review and survey findings in the dedicated publication available on OSOR. The resulting guidelines are structured into 3 chapters. They begin by detailing how public administrations can lay a solid foundation to sustainably engage with open source. They also provide recommendations on how public administrations can join an existing community or build their own from scratch. One of the goals of producing these guidelines was to help public administrations and open source communities collaborating with them to understand what the main factors contributing to community sustainability are. To this end, we identify 5 key sustainability factors. These are community vibrancy. It relates to members' motivation and the community's capacity to retain current members and attract new ones. Open source communities should provide opportunities for growth. Sustainable funding relates to funding and resource management within the community. Clear governance structure relates to the presence of transparent processes and procedures within the community. Technological maturity relates to the quality of the software source code and its documentation. Last but not least, public sector adoption incentives relates to the nuances of public administrations. This includes the importance of having support of the political and managerial hierarchy, raising awareness of open source, and being open to change. The recommendations shared in the guidelines build on each of these factors. We will deep dive into what each of these factors mean in practice shortly.
Having explained the key sustainability factors, we would like to highlight how they are reflected in practice. We will take a closer look at 5 different communities and highlight a sustainability factor in each and what it means for the community. Launched in 2009 by the Finnish National Land Survey, OSOR is an open source software framework that can be used to easily build web mapping applications, showcase geospatial data, and further analyze it. Thanks to OSOR, public administrations and other organizations that use the software can share their spatial data and work collaboratively. Today, approximately 40 organizations are involved in OSOR's development. Although the project originated within the public sector, the solution is now used in several public and private organizations in Finland and abroad to support geospatial projects. Many factors contribute to OSOR's sustainability. However, we would like to highlight its sustainable funding. The initial budget for the project came from the Finnish Ministry of Agriculture. Once the other public administrations became interested in using OSOR, the project team set up a joint development forum, which has a say in the development of OSOR. Each interested member signs a contract and contributes a yearly fee set at €5,000. In our guidelines, we offer several recommendations on how to secure sustainable funding for one's community. Organizations should calculate the total cost of ownership of their project to have a clear idea of the required budget, secure funding, either public or private, for the entire project evolution, and assess if they might need any additional resources down the line.
Let's now turn to the importance of having a clear governance structure in your community. Launched by the City of Paris in 2001, Lutes is a free and open source portal engine that allows users to quickly create a website or a web application. Part operating system and part content management system, the source code helps users to easily create and maintain custom websites and applications, which can then be further enhanced with additional functional modules. As a project launched by the public sector, the software Lutes is maintained and developed within the municipal government of Paris. To ensure it can operate smoothly, the 100-member community has established a clear governance structure with well-defined roles established for each contributor. Inspiring leaders help to steer the daily work of the community. OSOR's guidelines recommend for any community to establish a clear decision-making structure in the community with defined roles and responsibilities and to produce easily accessible guidelines. A community should have a core team consisting of members who make regular contributions to the software, interact with the broader community, and are responsible for making key project decisions.
Looking at technological maturity, we want to highlight the community of Integrate. Launched by students, Integrate is an open source digital integration platform designed to reduce information poverty for new arrivals in and within Germany. Today, it has helped over 60 German municipalities, each of which now are community members of Integrate. As a testament to its sustainability, the community also hopes to launch internationally. The Integrate software is technologically mature and well documented. A designated team updates the software, conducts peer reviews, and follows up on any bug reports. They ensure that Integrate is up to date, responsive to the community's needs, and digitally relevant. The team behind Integrate believes that the mature and user-friendly packaging of their software is one of the key factors explaining their success and rapid growth. In the guidelines, you will find multiple recommendations to take into account when it comes to maintaining your software. It is important to plan regular updates and new releases and to provide up-to-date and high-quality documentation. The technical maturity of software is crucial for the community's sustainability as it is the foundation on which it is built.
Next, let's take a closer look at the role that community vibrancy plays in sustainability and how this can be achieved. In 2019, the city of Groningen decided to launch a participatory democracy platform titled The Voice of Groningen. The municipality chose to create a fork of the console software, which offers an open source digital platform and an app for participatory democracy. While Voice of Groningen is an independent public sector-led initiative in its own right, they began to contribute to the existing open source community that had already been built around the console software, not just the fork that they had developed. One of the key factors behind the sustainability of both Voice of Groningen and Console is the community vibrancy. Members of the core team of Voice of Groningen indicated that they chose Console as it was a well-documented solution with a strong and supportive community of developers behind it. Another testament to the sustainability of Console is that whilst the software has been worked more than 550 times, a lot of communities contribute upstream and share their software updates with Console. Our guidelines emphasize the importance of a common sense of purpose in the community as a way to ensure members' commitment, as is the case for the Voice of Groningen and Console communities. Ensuring members' motivation is key for long-term community sustainability and growth. The three main ways to do this is to recognize your members' work, ensure transparent decision-making processes, and organize regular meetups.
The final sustainability factor is public sector adoption incentives. We will analyze it through the perspective of the Developers Italia, a public sector launched community of software developers, and the central open source software platform designed for the delivery of digital public services in Italy. The founders of Developers Italia had a good understanding of both public sector processes and the nature of open source communities. For this reason, the core team invested significant resources in educating their public sector peers about the horizontal and collaborative nature of OSS projects, inviting them to regular community meetings and showcasing community achievements. Similarly, despite some hesitations, community managers insisted that everyone should work together on a common platform as a way to break silos and ensure transparent decision making. In our guidelines, we recommend building relationships outside your community to help you boost its recognition within your public administration. Contribution and resources dedicated to your open source community have to be recognized and valued by the management and employees. This can only happen if other civil servants outside the community understand what working on an open source solution entails, such as the horizontal and communal nature of open source projects. All of the communities analyzed in our case studies demonstrated flexibility and agility to work with and within public administrations and often opted to increase the number of actors involved to strengthen their sustainability.
We hope that the presentation of these 5 sustainable communities and an explanation of how their success factors are linked to recommendations in our guidelines shed light on how public administrations can build sustainable open source ecosystems. The recommendations we presented are just a snapshot of what is available in the guidelines. In there, you will find many more practical recommendations, tips, and resources. Before we close our presentation, we would like to let you know that guidelines are currently open for feedback. We are keen to hear from our community about how they could be further improved in order to meet your needs. So go ahead, have a read, and if you feel like you might have something to share, let us know. Thank you for joining us today. If you would like to hear more news from Uzor, be sure to subscribe to our newsletter and stay in touch.